Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now, let's get into today's tale. On my 32nd birthday, instead of wishing me a happy birthday, my dad looked me straight in the eye and said coldly, "We want you to leave and expect you out by tomorrow morning." His reason, laid out right there during the party, was that I was grown, had a career, and had my job. Meanwhile, my younger brother was about to get married and needed his own space. That night at dinner, with a cake that read, "Goodbye, Miles," a parting gift from my brother Levi, and my father's emotionless, words still echoing in my ears, all I could think was one thing. I silently whispered to my late mother, "I'm sorry, Mom," because I had failed to fulfill her last wish, and the next morning, I packed up and walked out of that house. Not out of anger, not because I was giving up. I left to make my final decisions, for them. Follow the story, and let me know what you think about my choices. Hello, everyone. My name is Miles. I'm 33 years old and a software engineer living in Austin. I rent an apartment in the East Riverside area. At my age, I should probably have my own house and a small family by now. But because of a few turns life took, I'm still someone who's starting over. And those turning points? They came from my own family, the people I loved the most. I used to believe that as long as I lived responsibly, loved deeply, and made sacrifices for my family, everything would eventually come back around. But once they cross a particular line, some things can never return to how they were. It took me nearly 10 years of my life to understand that. I was born and raised in a well-off family in a quiet suburb of Austin. My dad, Graham, was a civil engineer. He worked at a structural design firm, had a steady income, and was known as one of the top engineers in the area. My mom, Celeste, was a third-grade teacher at a nearby public school. My parents met for the first time at a bus stop when they were both young. According to my mom, it was drizzling that day. She missed her bus, and my dad sat with a briefcase full of blueprints. They talked for 15 minutes while waiting for the next one, exchanged addresses, and married a year later. Not long after, I was born. Growing up, I never lacked anything. My family wasn't wealthy, but my parents always ensured I had enough. I had my bike and a few construction toy sets, just like the neighborhood kids. And every year on my birthday, my mom would bake me a cake. My dad wasn't talkative, but he always remembered what I liked. One time, I glanced at a toy truck model in a store window, and a week later, he brought it home for me. My mom would ask me every night how school was, if anyone teased me. And before I went to sleep, she'd come into my room, pull the blanket up to my chin, and press her hand gently on my forehead. That's how I grew up, surrounded by genuine love and care from my parents. But then, when I was 8 years old, my younger brother Levi was born. And from that very moment, the way my dad treated me started to change. I still remember the day my mom brought Levi home. Everyone in the family was gathered around the brand new crib, busy fussing over the baby, while I stood at the doorway. I felt this deep sadness, like I had been pushed aside. From then on, it seemed like my dad's attention shifted to Levi. He would carry him around and call him my little treasure, while I was slowly treated like someone who had already grown up and didn't need much care anymore. Even though my dad didn't love me the way he used to, I still had my mom. She saw the shift in things but never said it out loud. I could tell from the way she looked at me and the way she gently squeezed my hand every time my dad only held Levi. She tried to make up for it in quiet ways. Even when she was busy with the baby, she still read to me every night, packed a little piece of cake just for me to bring to school, and slipped a tiny note into my books that said, "I love you." And just like that, I grew up in the shadow of my father's favoritism and my mother's quiet attempts to make up for it. But I never blamed her for staying silent. I understood that she was afraid of conflict, afraid her children would become the reason for arguments between her and my father. So she chose silence. And I chose silence too, because I had her. Then, when I turned 18, the first significant blow hit us. My father had an accident while working on a construction site. He survived, but could no longer continue his job and was forced to retire. From that moment on, my mother carried everything. With her modest salary as a teacher and the small accident compensation my father received, our family could only afford the basics. At the time, I had just started my first year of college. I couldn't bear the thought of adding more pressure on my mom with my tuition and living expenses, so I decided to take care of myself. I took out student loans and worked part-time whenever I could. Years later, I graduated and started working. I thought things would slowly get better. But then, the second blow came, and it was even more cruel. I remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the office working when I got a call from Levi. He panicked, telling me Mom had collapsed. In the kitchen while making dinner, I immediately asked for the rest of the day off and rushed to the hospital where she had just been taken. When I walked into her room, the doctor pulled me aside before I could ask anything. His voice was gentle but firm. "Your mother has cancer. It's late stage. She doesn't have much time left." I stood frozen. At that moment, I wished it was just a nightmare. That in a few minutes, I would wake up and she would still be there, healthy and by my side. 3 months after Mom was admitted to the hospital, that cruel pancreatic cancer took her away from us. I still remember that afternoon clearly in that cold hospital room, just before she took her last breath. She gently squeezed my hand and whispered her final words to me. Her voice was weak, just loud enough for me to hear every word, but each one was obvious. "The whole family depends on you now. Take care of your father for me and help your brother become someone who matters." After she said that, I just nodded. I didn't reply because my throat had tightened so much that I couldn't get a word out. After that nod, she looked at me for a few more seconds, smiled, and let out a soft breath. Her hand resting in mine slowly relaxed, and that was it. She was gone. Levi started crying first, his voice shaking with panic. Then came my father. He gripped her hand tightly and completely broke down. As for me, I don't even remember when I started crying. All I remember is standing there in silence while everything around me felt like it was falling apart, piece by piece. 3 days later, we held the funeral. Many people came to say goodbye, including relatives from both sides of the family, old friends, and Mom's coworkers from school. Everyone said she was a kind woman, a devoted teacher, and a gentle friend. They all mourned how sudden and unfair her passing had been. I stood in front of her casket without saying a word. I bowed my head low, clenched my fists, and made a promise. In my heart, I'll try my best to do exactly what you asked. And from that day on, I carried everything she left behind. In the months after Mom passed, I did everything I could to follow her final wish. I took her place in the family, handling every task, every expense, every responsibility, no matter how small or overwhelming. At the time, I had just graduated. My starting salary wasn't bad, but with nearly $3,000 in monthly costs, including living expenses, my dad's medication, and Levi's tuition, everything became a heavier burden than someone fresh out of school could realistically handle. To make it work, I had to take on extra jobs. It started with a few small freelance projects. Then I began accepting coding gigs outside of work hours and on weekends. I taught online classes to college students. If a job paid, I took it. Some days I only slept 3 hours. Some weeks I didn't see a single friend. Every bit of my time revolved around one thing: figuring out how to earn enough to keep the household running. Those first 2 years were a constant grind. But I didn't complain. I remembered what my mother said and how she looked at me during her final moments. Whenever I felt exhausted, I pictured her face, which gave me enough strength to keep going a little longer. By the 3rd year, I finally got a raise. The side jobs became more stable. I could breathe a little easier for the first time in a long while, and I kept that pace going for 9 years. Years without a proper vacation. 9 years without being able to afford a new car. 9 years of living without letting myself think about what I wanted. I truly believe that after all that effort, they would understand. That my dad and Levi would show me some form of appreciation, or at the very least, offer a simple thank you. But they didn't. They never saw what I did as a sacrifice. To them, it was just duty. Something I was expected to do. Because I was the oldest. Because I made a promise to Mom. They repeated her words like they were law, but neither of them ever asked me if I was tired, or if I wanted to stop. I kept pushing through and sacrificing for nearly 9 years, all because I promised my mother. I held on to that promise until my 32nd birthday. It was a weekday. I got off work late and came home when it was already dark. All I could think about was a simple dinner and a bit of peace after another long, exhausting day at the office. Dinner that night felt just like every other. The 3 of us sat at the table eating in silence. But halfway through, Levi suddenly stood up and left the room. I figured he was grabbing something. A moment later, he came back holding a cake. At that moment, I felt happy. I thought to myself, they remembered. After everything, they still remembered my birthday. But then he placed the cake on the table, and I froze when I saw the words written in pale blue frosting. Goodbye, Miles. For a moment, I didn't understand what was going on. I looked at Levi, then turned to Dad, hoping someone would explain. But no one said a word for several seconds. Finally, I spoke. I looked at Levi and asked directly, "What is this supposed to mean?" Before Levi could answer, my father looked me straight in the eye and said, with a voice so calm, it was almost chilling, "We want you to leave and expect you out by tomorrow morning." He paused for a moment, then added, "Levi's starting a family. You need to move out. It'll be better for everyone." I didn't say anything right away, not because I agreed, but because I needed a few moments to process what I had just heard. Were they kicking me out of the house I had supported, financially for almost a decade, on my birthday? A few minutes later, I looked up. My voice was calm, but every word weighed 1,000 pounds. I stared directly into my father's eyes and asked, "Why is it me who has to leave this house? Have you both forgotten who's been caring for everything for the last 9 years?" Right then, Levi cut in without hesitation. His voice was clear, steady. "You only did all that because Mom asked, not because we needed you to." I turned to look at him, and in that moment, I didn't feel angry. I just felt cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. That one sentence didn't just erase everything I had sacrificed. It revealed a truth I had been trying not to believe all these years. A truth people had wanted to tell me about Levi. And right then, on my birthday, I knew for sure I no longer wanted to keep that promise to my mother. I'm not the kind of person who likes to argue or fight to prove a point. So after hearing those words from Levi, I didn't respond. I just stood up quietly and walked back to my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my father's cold words, Levi's cake with that subtle message, and the indifferent looks on both their faces played over and over in my head like a broken tape that wouldn't stop. Then, all the things I had tried to ignore came flooding back. I remembered something from 7 years ago, when Levi was 17. Asher, one of our cousins, once told me that Levi used to call me the uptight old man. He said, I was always counting every penny, living like someone who didn't know how to enjoy life. I just laughed it off back then. I figured he was young and didn't understand. I thought that one day when he grew up, he would come to see why I was the way I was. But later, it wasn't just Asher. A few other relatives told me the same thing. Levi called me a walking ATM. Whenever he wanted something and I hesitated, he had to remind me of what Mom asked. Like clockwork, I'd say yes. Even then, I kept holding on to the same thought. He'll understand someday. It's just not the time yet. But now Levi is 24 years old. He's not a kid anymore. He's a grown man. And what he said to me tonight felt like a slap in the face. Everything I had sacrificed for him meant nothing. As for my father, I had stayed silent through every dinner trying to keep the peace. I remembered one dinner clearly. He turned to me and said, without hesitation, "Levi is the one with a future. He's the one who will carry on." At that moment, I wanted so badly to say something. I wanted to slam my fork on the table and ask him, "Then what am I?" But I didn't. I knew he was sick. And I remembered what Mom told me. Don't upset your father. So I kept quiet. And now, on my 32nd birthday, I was given a cake to say goodbye. I was told to leave my home, to give Levi space to start a family. I have nothing to hold on to if that's what they want. Tomorrow morning I'll leave this house, not because I'm giving up, but because they've already pushed me out. And then I'll see for myself how they manage without me around in the days ahead. The next morning, I woke up early. I first sent a short message to the HR department at work, asking for a personal day off. Then I began packing in silence. My room had never held much because I had lived like someone just temporarily passing through for nearly 9 years. The things that truly mattered to me fit neatly into 2 suitcases. Before closing the last drawer, I pressed a sealed envelope inside, a plastic folder. It was my mother's will. Only I knew about it. She had left it with her lawyer with an explicit instruction. It was to be given only to me and should not be revealed unless a specific condition was met. At the time, I never asked her why. But the day I walked out of that house, I finally understood why she had done it that way. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, I rolled my 2 suitcases out of the room. As I passed the living room, my father and Levi sat there. They didn't say a word. No one looked surprised. No one tried to stop me. And there was nothing in their faces that suggested what had happened the night before was just a cruel joke. At that moment, as I faced them, I said nothing. I opened the front door, pulled my suitcases across the step, and walked out to my car. Just as I placed my hand on the gear shift, ready to drive away, Levi appeared at the passenger window. He leaned down with a friendly smile, the kind I used to mistake for genuine, and said, with a mocking tone, "Don't forget to come to the wedding. I'll text you the date when we have it." I didn't respond. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, pressed the gas, and drove away. For the next week, I stayed in a budget hotel. It wasn't luxurious, but it was quiet enough to gather my thoughts, and more importantly, regain my peace. During that week, I also used my evenings after work to visit rental apartments. After 1 week in the hotel, I moved into a small apartment in the East Riverside area. That's where I live now. It's a modest space, clean and private. Most importantly, no one can tell me to leave anymore. The day before I moved in, I went to the cemetery. I stood in front of my mother's grave for a long time, holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, the kind she used to love. My heart felt heavy. At some point, I whispered to her, "I'm sorry, Mom. I did my best, but they don't need me anymore." Right after I said that, a soft breeze brushed my face. It wasn't cold. It felt warm and gentle, almost like the touch of a hand that once comforted me to sleep. At that moment, I thought she was somewhere above, quietly watching over me, and she understood. Maybe she even agreed with the decision I made. The 2 following months were the most peaceful I had experienced in years, after nearly a decade of exhaustion. Morning. I woke up in my small apartment, made coffee, played my favorite soft music, and got ready for work. And my savings account balance finally reached $10,000 for the first time in 9 years. For the first time in almost a decade, I wasn't paying bills for anyone else. I was only taking care of myself. And strangely, I didn't feel selfish. I just felt relieved. During those quiet evenings alone, I started seriously thinking about the future. About buying a home of my own. A space that would truly be mine. With a post-tax income of about $90,000 a year, I did the math carefully. If I kept up my current savings pace, I'd have enough for a down payment in just 2 more years. After that, a 30-year mortgage would be entirely manageable. For the first time, that dream didn't feel so far away. And in those same moments, I finally realized how much I had lost over the past 9 years. It wasn't just money. It was time. It was energy. It was my youth. It was every opportunity I had turned down to carry the weight of a family that never once said thank you. As for my father and Levi, ever since the day I left, there has been complete silence. No messages, no calls, not even a simple check-in. I didn't reach out either. I had grown too used to being the one always to extend my hand. And if they thought I would return like I always did, they were wrong this time. I wasn't waiting, but I knew one day they would call. And when that day comes, when they finally realize I've stepped away from my role as their walking ATM, it will already be too late. And just as I had predicted, in the 3rd month after I left that house, my father started calling. When his name appeared on the screen, I wasn't surprised. I stared at the phone vibrating on the table, then quietly swiped it away. I knew exactly why he was calling, and I knew this wasn't about checking in to see how I was doing. The first call went unanswered, then came the second, then the third. They kept going. I didn't pick up a single one, not because I was angry, but because I was too tired to have anything left to say. After dozens of missed calls, he finally left a message. Just one short line, "Come home now, we need to talk." I looked at that message, then gently swiped it aside without replying. I let him see that I had read it. That was enough. A few hours later, it was Levi's turn to call. And again, I responded the same way. I didn't answer. To avoid the noise, I switched my phone to silent and placed it face down. There wasn't a single part of me that wanted to hear his voice. The same voice that not long ago gave me a birthday cake with the words, "Goodbye," written on it. Over the next 3 days, my phone lit up with missed calls and unread messages. Hundreds of them, all from the 2 people I had spent nearly a decade living for. On the 4th day, the calls stopped. No more messages, no more missed calls. Everything suddenly went quiet as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew that silence all too well. It had never meant the end. It was just their way of stepping back to plan a different approach. And just as I expected, that morning around 7:30, they showed up. As I pulled into the parking lot and was about to walk into the office building, my father and Levi stood before the glass doors as if they had been waiting there for a while. Without hesitation, my father stepped forward and nearly shouted, "Why the hell haven't you been picking up your phone? What are you trying to pull?" Levi followed a step behind, his voice lower but still filled with urgency. "We need to talk, Miles. It's important." At that moment, I looked directly at both of them and answered calmly, "With how you speak to me, I have nothing to say." Before they could react, I leaned to the side and looked through the glass into the lobby. As soon as I spotted Brandon, the morning security guard, I raised my voice. "Brandon, can you call the police for me?" Brandon, stationed just inside the gate as usual, immediately stepped out from behind his desk. He came toward me quickly, concern in his voice. "What's going on, Miles?" Without hesitation, I pointed at my father and Levi, who were still frozen. I spoke without even thinking. "This is my father and my brother. They're harassing me. Can you help me call the police?" Brandon glanced over at them, then nodded without asking any more questions. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. When they saw Brandon raise his phone, my father turned and walked away. Levi hurried after him. They left so quickly that it was almost like they were running, leaving behind an empty courtyard with only me, Brandon, and a heavy silence. Brandon turned to me, his voice filled with concern. "You okay?" I nodded slowly, my eyes still following their figures disappearing behind the corner of the parking lot. Around 6 that evening, just as I parked my car in front of the apartment building, they showed up again. This time, I knew, for sure they had followed me from work. The moment I locked my car door, Levi rushed over. His voice was softer now, lowered with intention. "Miles, Dad and I need 30 minutes. Can we talk across the street at the coffee shop?" I glanced at the cafe across the road, its light still on. Then I nodded without saying a word. A few minutes later, we stepped inside and chose a table by the window. The three of us sat in silence. No one spoke for the first full minute. Unable to stand the tension, I broke the silence. I asked directly, with no hesitation, "What do you want?" My father leaned forward slightly, about to say something, but Levi held up his hand to stop him. Then he turned to me, speaking plainly. His voice dropped a little. "Can you co-sign a loan for me and Dad? I need the money for the wedding and to invest in a significant project." After that request, I sat still. A moment passed before I asked, "What if I say no?" This time my father couldn't hold back. He jumped in immediately, his tone sharp, like I had insulted him. He growled through his teeth, "You have to sign. That house is my property and your mother's while she was alive. Even if she left her share to you, you don't have the right to claim it." After he said that, I responded clearly, one word at a time. "Why don't I have the right?" She made a will. Her share of that house belongs to me, and if I have to, I'll take it to court. When that happens, the house will be sold. Right after that, both of them fell silent. Levi lowered his head. My father looked away. I stayed seated, saying nothing else. They didn't respond, but I knew their silence didn't mean agreement. It meant they were already planning their next move. While both of them sat there in silence, clearly calculating their next move, my thoughts drifted back to my mother and to the gift she left me before she passed away. Years ago, exactly 30 days after my mother's death, I received an unexpected phone call from the office of Attorney Ryan, who had been a close friend of hers since high school. Over the phone, he said only one thing: "Miles, come alone. Do not, under any circumstances, let your father or your brother know." That afternoon, I showed up at his downtown office. Attorney Ryan opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it on the desk and slid it toward me. Inside was a handwritten will, notarized and stamped with full legal authority. The very first lines I read left me frozen. My mother had left all of her assets to me. At the time, her share was 50% of the house she co-owned with my father. Before I could ask anything, Attorney Ryan spoke up. He said, "Your mother came to see me as soon as she found out about the cancer. She knew that if she did nothing, after her death, the entire house would automatically belong to your father. And knowing the kind of man he is, she feared you would be left with nothing." I sat there in silence. Then I broke down in tears. At that moment, I understood that my mother didn't do it out of favoritism. She was trying to protect something for me. Her eldest son had grown up without much love from his father and had never once asked for anything. Since that day, I kept everything to myself. I never once I told my father and Levi about the will because I knew the moment they found out, they would try everything to pressure me into giving up that share. Under family or duty, they wouldn't hesitate to use any reason. I stayed silent for nearly a decade, and now, after our meeting at the cafe, they finally knew. They found out when the bank requested my signature. I imagine they must have been shocked when they heard. As I sat there, lost in memories of my mother, of that afternoon at the lawyer's office 9 years ago, a dry throat clearing snapped me back to the present. Right after that, my father spoke. Again. "I think you should sign. Your mother wouldn't be happy if you refused to help your family." At that moment, I felt my blood boil. I clenched my hands under the table, trying to stay calm, but my voice was heavy and firm when I finally spoke. Every word came out solid and sharp. Don't bring Mom into this. You're the one who told me to leave that house. And Levi, the son you've always defended, he's the one who handed me a birthday cake that said, "Goodbye, Miles." Don't either of you forget that. After I said that, I looked into his eyes and saw no hint of guilt. Instead, he fired back without hesitation, his voice laced with threat. "I'll sue you for manipulating a dying woman. You probably took advantage of her when she was weak, pressured her into writing that will so you could take her share." The moment he said that, I let out a short, bitter laugh. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I stood up, adjusted my coat, and looked him in the eyes one last time before walking away. I spoke in a steady, cold voice. "Don't forget you have 2 children. And to be fair, that house would be split evenly when you and Mom are gone. Half and half. Now that Mom left, her half to me I own 50%, no more, no less." I paused, then tilted my head slightly and added slowly, "Go ahead and sue. I won't stop you. But remember this. After that lawsuit, the one who loses more will be you." Then I turned and walked away without looking back. My steps felt light, like I had finally cut the last thread that tied me to what used to be called family. After returning to my apartment, I still believed my father was only trying to scare me. But I was wrong. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the court. The moment I held the envelope with the red seal, I stood silently at my front door, hands clenched, my chest hollow. A part of me had prepared for this. But when it truly happened, I couldn't stop the tightness rising in my chest. The very next morning, I went straight to Attorney Ryan's office. When I walked in, he looked at me and gave a slight nod, as if he had known that this moment would come. A month later, we had a formal meeting at the law office with both legal teams present. No shouting, no threats, just a thick, suffocating tension hanging in the air. They likely knew they couldn't win this case. My mother's will was legally sound, witnessed, signed, and backed by medical documents proving she was fully aware and in control when she signed it. And maybe they also didn't want to drag it out any longer, wasting money on attorneys and court fees. So they backed down. I still remember that day clearly. For the first time since Levi was born, my father spoke to me quietly, like a man finally realizing he was fighting a losing battle. He looked at me and softly said, "I'm sorry, Miles. Can you let it go this time?" At that moment, I hesitated. A part of me wanted to nod, wanted to believe that, for once, he truly meant it. But then the memories rushed back. I remembered my 32nd birthday. I remembered that cake with the words, "Goodbye, Miles." I remembered the countless nights of exhaustion, working myself to the bone to pay for everything without ever hearing a word of thanks. I answered him calmly, "No. You and Levi have 2 options. 1, pay rent for my half of the house. If the house is rented out, it could bring in about $100-200 a month. If you want to stay, pay me $600. I paused for a few seconds, making sure they heard what I said. then continued. Or 2, sell the house. I'll take my share. At that moment, Levi hissed. Through his teeth,